I just got done watching Choose or Die. I choose happiness. Yeah, so came out in the middle of the night. Still the middle of the night. I watched it right when it came out. That happened. So Netflix didn't seem to have put this out anywhere for early press viewings. So there's no reviews yet. I think Rotten Tomatoes at this moment still has 0 reviews on it. And yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so the premise is kind of like the new Jumanji stuff with The Rock, where it's an old retro video game that messes with people playing it and their reality, kind of. For how long it took the movie to try to explain the idea of this sort of tape-based choose-your-own-adventure game, I still don't fully understand the game or the kind of game it was trying to be like. I'm sort of right on the edge of the Oregon Trail people, so I understand the yes or no, 1 and 2 stuff. But in this, they actually type out the word instead of just hitting Y for yes. Is that how 80s games were? I honestly don't know. God, remember SimCity 2000? Yeah, so it stars Asa Butterfield, and her name is Lola Evans. The artwork and everything, it looks like it's an Asa Butterfield vehicle because he's obviously the most famous person in this thing, because he's a movie star. Lola Evans apparently was on The 100 and Carnival Row. I don't recognize her, but she is the main character of the story. Asa Butterfield is the side character. That's fine. I got no problem with that. Small movies, trading on a big name, not being the main character, that goes back to like the days of Roger Corman. He would do that all the time. I'm not surprised by that. I'm actually kind of cool with it if it means getting butts in seats, or in this case, getting people to click on this video on Netflix. Yeah, so it's sort of stylized and kind of has the vibe of something like It Follows or Escape Room. These sort of like high concept movies, and they have a real like specific look. I will have done that color grade, hopefully. I mean, it looks cool, I'll be honest. It was obviously made in the time of COVID because it doesn't seem like there's very many people in the same room ever. It's usually just 1 or 2 people in a room. Yeah, so they did like some weird like faux 80s stuff where like at one time there was this visual effect, there was like a glitch wall, and it had the bars of like an old TV, but it was a glitch. That was interesting. You spend a lot of time looking at the black screen with the green typing and sort of the lines of prompts. I guess what we would call command prompt today, but I'm not even sure that it was called that back then. But yeah, it's basically Jumanji. Like every time somebody starts the game, now they have to deal with it. And sort of the only way to get away with it is to copy it and send it to somebody else. So it's It Follows, it's The Ring, it's Jumanji. I have an eyelash that's driving me crazy. Nope, just paranoid and tired. I mean, I'll be honest, it started off strong because it didn't really try to explain anything. It just went right into the horror, the body horror, the creepiness, the make a choice. It was very on the nose about make a choice. Wasn't Truth or Die? Wasn't that a thing? It was like Truth or Die. It was like if Truth or Die took place in the 80s, I guess, except it's modern times using 80s equipment. They kept calling it retro vintage technology or some combination of those words. Retro tech, I guess. They said the word analog a lot. I'm trying to figure out how old the filmmakers were, because if they're my age, they might be old enough to actually have understood the sort of the 1980s play the tape kind of game that they were doing. Because even I was too young for most of the sort of, I think my jam was Yukon Trail, which was the sequel that nobody played, obviously. We also had that weird math game that elementary school had us play where it was like a Chutes and Ladders style game with robots, and you had to do math, and I don't think we ever finished the game in a period because we would only have like an hour and it would take like 20 minutes to get the game going. It was addictive though. Like weirdly at the beginning, having not explained anything, it's kind of a good situation because the audience and the main character, this girl, are sort of in the same situation where they don't really understand what's happening, and there's like a level of disbelief, like what is real, what is not real. And then by the end of the sort of the first big scene where she's actually working with it, that it's like manipulating reality and it's messing with her and it's focused on her, and I think she straight up says after one point that it knows things about her, so it does things to her, and there's sort of like an element of like it knows way more than it should kind of stuff. It had also these 8-bit sequences that were part of the game. They were like, it was kind of like a mini game almost, where you would have to get the person around the map, or there was a driving montage that was literally like an Atari style mini game where you were driving the car, but it was literally them just driving somewhere on the way to something. So it was like in the theme of what they were trying to do, but it wasn't actually part of the game, even though most of the other moments where it went into sort of 8-bit world where you just saw the screen, that was actually the game that was being played, because that was one of the ongoing things that she established like immediately. She figured out a lot of stuff really quickly, and to her credit, she seems smart, but she figured out that the game sort of restarts every single time at the same time of night. And she figured that out after like the first or second time. And so they have like the whole day to sort of solve the mystery. And then at like 2 a.m., they have to deal with whatever the game puts them through for like an hour or two. And then they're good for another, 22 hours. I mean, it really leaned heavily on the sort of like vintage 1980s nature, clicky keyboards, and you see her soldering a wire to the back of a motherboard, and that fixed the computer. Never say never, but it seems like the writers were sort of doing it in the fashion, but actually, like, I don't know if they really did enough research to really deliver it properly. There was a lot of also like tape to tape stuff. There's a weird amount of, I guess I would call them gags, but at least set pieces where using like magnetic tape, like like pre-CD tapes. Ozzy Butterfield was sort of the ambassador to all this 80s vintage stuff. He was the way in. He had this like computer repair company, and he was programming a game. And one of the very first things, I think the first scene you see him in, he's programming a character who looks a lot like Lara Croft Tomb Raider from like PS1, except it's obviously the other girl, Lola Evans. And he's like, oh, sorry, that's not what I was trying to do. And she was like, it wasn't clear if she was flattered or if she was annoyed by the fact that he stole her likeness and is putting her in a game, which, very, very creepy. It's weird though. Like most of the time when you're doing something with like technology and computers, it becomes campy, or it becomes like hackers where they're like hacking the net, and the net is these 3-dimensional universes, and you're doing that. It was none of that. It was trying to stay true to like the paradigms of like code being written down in command prompt on the screen, like that kind of stuff. But then sort of the 8-bit sort of simple games like that, paired with, body horror and just very strange things that it's forcing the characters to do. And it's not clear if it's like a turn-based thing. It seems like just at 2 a.m. every morning, it turns on and says, choose or die, and is scary, and the lights flicker, and then something happens. But it's like weirdly specific stuff, and the solution is aggressively unclear. Even when you have like a choice on the ground next to a choice on the ground, the character usually goes for one choice and then changes their mind and goes for the other choice, and somehow that other choice is the correct choice and like solves it completely. It was very like almost every single one of those choose or die moments was like that, where they just nailed it. They absolutely, like, the character not only made the correct choice, but like it was such the correct choice that it completely negated the other choice. I think the word is convenient, narratively convenient, maybe. Yeah, and honestly, the choose or die stuff, which is, I'd say maybe every other scene or every third scene, that's where this is an interesting story. That's where the meat of the whole thing exists. And it's kind of fun. Like, the more you learn, the more it sort of undermines itself, because it becomes sort of silly and makes less and less sense as you go. But the choose or die stuff was at least like interesting and had tension and had characters making really tough choices, even though the level of emotion they were conveying didn't really match with what we knew about what was going on. And then there was all the other times. The other two kind of like secondary stories in the story are her relationship to Ozzy Butterfield, which is basically they're friends. She's a hot nerd. He's just a nerd. And that's pretty much their only dynamic. He's obviously hot for her, but she couldn't, give a crap. And then the other one of those little stories, which we spend a lot of time on, she lives with her mother. Her mother is a crack addict living in the projects. They have some sort of weird, creepy, slicked back hair white guy who is sort of her drug dealer, but he's also, I guess he's the landlord. But then later she gets an eviction notice and he's not the landlord. But then he visits her mom in the hospital because of reasons. And he's like, we're going to have a perfect family together. And it was kind of like a sexual assault implication, but it was also very much just, he was like a slumlord and or her pimp. But it was all kind of like wrapped into one, and it was unclear what the deal was. I'm pretty sure he propositioned the girl, Lola Evans' character, but the way they described it, the way they said it, it could have just been a misunderstanding. I really don't understand it. Obviously, she was going to say, eat shit and die to him, but I genuinely don't understand what that exchange was, because it was so obtuse. I mean, I liked how the movie looked. I will say that. And I think the acting performances, especially Lola Evans, and obviously Ozzy Butterfield is a very talented actor. So I don't really have complaints there. It's just that the internal logic of the story was completely broken, and it didn't even enter into like campy territory. It didn't make sense. And it wasn't like, there was a little bit of body horror ultimately at the beginning, but then it really didn't get any more gross because it sort of went off in a completely different direction and was more about the sort of the psychologically torturing of the characters. But then they're already sort of maxed out right away. Like the choose or die stuff goes to the weird stuff for the main characters like as quickly as possible, and so there's really nowhere else to go. And so they end up going on this weird like road trip adventure, which explains something but also makes it more confusing. And then they go on another road trip adventure to somewhere else, and you know, there's like a boss battle, which was kind of inventive, except it like made everything even more confusing because the rules that were established were basically whatever the computer says you got to figure out how you're going to do. But then during the boss battle, you can just kind of just do really specific things and it works absolutely perfectly. And there's almost no jeopardy to it, except for obviously you're trying to kill each other or something. I'm not totally sure. I won't give away the big reveal because I don't even know if I would call it a big reveal, but there's a reveal, which is there's like a grander plan or grander design to this, as you do. I think Escape Room did that too. Different plan, obviously. For how many times that weird glitch sound happened, I'm still like hearing it in the back of my head. I feel like my light is making that noise and it's driving me crazy right now. Yeah, I don't know. It was an experience. I appreciated that it was an hour and 20 minutes, if that. I feel like it was about an hour 10. And honestly, I'm glad it went that short. Was it scary? Not really. Was it interesting and fascinating and made you think? Up until a point, and then it starts explaining stuff, and they sort of undid all their good work of not explaining anything up until that point. I think there's probably a good like 60-minute or 45-minute movie in there where they just don't explain anything, and these characters are just grinding it out and making choices, and there's no crack mom dealing with crack stuff, and there's no creepy slick back hair guy who's kind of like creepy. And Ozzy Butterfield is a person instead of just a creepy guy who's very helpful, and then all of a sudden he is just not there. I don't know. Was it worth staying up all night? I don't think so. Was it worth a watch? Maybe. I mean, I'm exhausted, and it seems like it was hard to follow, but it wasn't hard to follow. It's just that I don't think it understood what it was doing. That's the vibe I was getting throughout the whole thing. Yeah, so I'd like to see Lola Evans in more stuff. I really liked her. I thought she was good. Ozzy Butterfield, I've got no complaints. I consider him a good young actor. Robert Englund plays himself as a voice in this. He's like the tape recorder voice, which at first I was like, oh, that's super fun. And Ozzy Butterfield nerds out and he goes, you don't know who Robert Englund is, to the girl? And there's that whole like, I'm a bigger nerd than you. And she's like, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, you're definitely a bigger nerd than me. But then he didn't explain to her who Robert Englund was, which I thought was crazy because he's Freddy Krueger. And this movie definitely is sort of in the same vein, or I guess distantly an homage to Freddy Krueger in the way it sort of deals with pop culture and sort of the warping of reality through the lens of like a horror story. I don't know. I'm not convinced anybody's going to watch this because all evidence points to the fact that Netflix already knows that this is not going to work, and they're just letting it happen because it's one more thing to have until they decide to take it off their platform, which they also do too. So I realized I forgot to mention that they aggressively set up not just a sequel, but a franchise at the end of this movie. The last probably 15 minutes of this movie, the story has been over for a bad amount of time at this point, and now they're just setting up for sequels and franchises, very much in the sort of bad, tone-deaf way they did with Escape Room, if that makes sense. Although, honestly, I think Escape Room, it kind of worked logically, whereas the logic of this doesn't work at all. And there's a line that she says right at the end, I won't spoil it, but it made me go yuck. It made me cringe. It made me go, this is one of those lines that people don't say because it's too horrible, it's too dumb, it's too unreal of a person to actually say. Honestly, I'm not upset with this movie. It was a mess. It looked cool a lot of times. Honestly, it just makes me want to go watch It Follows again because that movie just is chicken soup for my horror soul. Yeah, it's another movie made in the time of COVID, and you can tell by how few people are in the scenes and how just sparse everything seems. And that's fine. There's going to be a rash of these for a while, and then they'll go away because productions will be fully built out again, and we'll be back to just this movie being this movie, except more people in it. I don't know. I got to edit this so I can go to sleep because I took a 5-hour energy at midnight and I'm starting to burn out already, and it's almost 4. Yeah, go see Choose or Die, or don't. It's on Netflix. You can always hit pause or, hit back and go watch New Girl episodes. That's probably what I would have done if I wasn't going to do a video about it. Yeah. There's definitely like a buzzing, but I can't tell if it's in my head or if it's my light, and I'm losing my mind. And this movie made the same noise, only louder. And it could just be my eardrums are just like tortured now, and they're just like set up for it. But it's the experience of like a tube TV sort of turning on and turning off, the sort of like staticky sound. It's driving me crazy. I'm losing my mind.